there's a design to make men weak because a weak man is easy to control.
If you've ever felt like you're performing your way through life, it might be time for a deeper conversation. Wayne Barkus is a men's coach, breathwork practitioner, and founder of Sovereign One, a clothing brand rooted in sustainability and full expression.
If we're going to speak to what's truly missing, it's a deeper connection to God, to rhythm, to nature, to the unknown, to surrender, to trust, to intuition, to this spiritual realm, which is where all of the creativity, all of the joy, all the crux of life gets to come through. And it's the juice of life.
A father and a man in long-term sobriety, Wayne guides men through real thresholds, from shadow to responsibility, hesitation to courage, survival to truth. His message is clear. Sovereignty isn't given, it's chosen. One breath and one act of integrity at a time. Masculinity is not toxic. It is a sacred force, and it's a stabilizing force.
And there's a spiritual layer here that's missing, and it's missing from culture, and it's by design. Because these feelings, these emotions that we're speaking to, they're almost invisible.
Wayne, it's been a while, man. Super stoked to have you here and drop in. I've been following along your stuff on socials and all your hard-hitting truth bombs that you've been putting out there, and really nice to drop back in with you, brother.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm really grateful to be in this space, and I'm glad this stuff has hit and has been felt and has brought us to this conversation, which I anticipate us to have a lot of common threads in between, the work that we're looking to offer to the world. So grateful for this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure, brother. I actually wanted to kick it off with one of the posts that you've written and
bring it through.
Get a little insight from you. 10 years ago, a week into a Jerry Springer level divorce, I sat in therapy for the first time in my life. I spoke, I told the story, the facts, the chaos, the blame, but I couldn't feel it. The grief, the rage, the shame. Then I noticed it. I was acting, packaging my pain in it's not so bad, so we wouldn't feel too much. A childhood trick. Protect the other. Abandon yourself. I didn't crack open in therapy because words couldn't reach what I'd armored shut. But men did crack me open. These men were different. They were performing strength. They embodied it. They had also seen their own shadows, held their own grief, and walked through their own cave. It took time to trust, to open, to let them near the wound I swore no one would ever touch. And that's when everything shifted. I stopped hiding, stopped softening my truth for other people's comfort. I didn't see myself as broken. I saw myself as healing, and that was enough. I spoke from the wound until it stopped speaking for me. One day, the story changed. My voice steadied, the fear loosened, and I stopped diluting my essence to be more palatable. Men's work, breath work, therapy, they all mattered. They did change my life, but only because I was willing to be changed. None of them worked until I stopped resisting what they were trying to show me, the real me. I had to walk into the fire, let the boy die, and meet the man waiting on the other side. That part, no one could do for me. That's some real shit. Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, what I'm really kind of laying out is what I didn't even know that was happening as it was happening. It wasn't until maybe about 3/4 of the way through that I even knew that I was on a hero's journey. And I was in a process of initiation, and it was grueling, and it was beautiful, and it wrenched me and opened me and cracked me open. And that moment in therapy was so, these are the moments that I speak to, in that these moments only happen when you step in.
Sure.
And these little subtle whispers that happen can create an entirely new timeline. Because had I not heard and witnessed what I was doing, it was the first time in therapy that I actually got to see myself act and do this thing, because I didn't have many spaces where I was in that wasn't this back and forth banter or chaos with family or, just kind of moving on. There was a ton of space for me to witness how I was interacting with this man that I didn't know. And when I caught myself like, why am I performing for this guy? He doesn't care. He's literally paid to show up to help me. That was a really big shift, because it shifted me out of therapy into the call to adventure. Because I'm like, oh, this felt really good. It feels good to talk about it. And what I didn't understand that I know now is that talking just actually, like, it really helps our nervous system. It's the first step to calming our nervous system. And if we don't talk, we suppress. And as it gets lower from the throat chakra, then it starts to get lodged into our solar plexus and our sacral, and our truth gets stuck. And I've said it before, there's so many men that are just choking on their truth, and I was one of them. But it felt good to talk about it. It felt good to actually hear the bullshit that was coming out of my mouth, so I could actually call myself in to a different level of being. But I had no idea what that looked like. I didn't have mentors. I didn't have role models. The role models that I had in my life was Michael Jordan or Tupac. Like, I've looked up to these, kind of hip hop, basketball, like that was about it. And I noticed that there was a massive gap in masculine mentorship that I had in my life. And it was just my dad. And that's what really set me on this discovery process of what does it mean to be a man. That's what led me to the mountains of California to begin my work with the Sacred Sons, which is the men that I'm speaking to in that post. And, look, I think a lot of guys can do that too, and get caught in the performing part that I was doing in therapy, because it's a coping mechanism, and so there's evolutions and iterations of ourselves that we get to see, we get to witness, and we get to be called forward. And that's been the beauty of having some really incredible men in my life to show me and call the real me forward.
That's powerful, man. And it's interesting because I think, it'd be nice to live in a world where initiation was part of the culture. And I think that's something we can speak about more after. But it is interesting that so many of the men that I connect with, that initiation actually looks like divorce. It looks like a relationship failing. It looks like reaching that next big milestone and feeling still empty and hollow inside, or transitioning careers, or losing it all.
Yeah.
And it's really that, that dive into the bottom where it's like, well, autopilot's working. Like, my patterns have been working enough to be able to get me to where I'm at. And then all of a sudden, some big confronting moment comes in and just sideswipes everything as you reevaluate. And it seems like that's what brought you there.
Yeah. And, that's step one. And,
Right.
and a lot of guys are there right now. And it's also the place that a lot of guys stay, which is, I had the opportunity after my divorce to recreate the pattern all over again, which I did, because I didn't know any better. I put all the blame outward, and I took no accountability or responsibility, because what that would ultimately mean is that I'd have to feel into the grief. I'd have to feel into the betrayal of my of myself, of how I abandoned myself and lost myself in my marriage. And I didn't know how to feel that. We're speaking to the invisible, right? And so, like, this is a spiritual layer. When we talk about initiation, there's a spiritual layer here that's missing, and it's missing from culture, and it's by design,
Hmm.
because these feelings, these emotions that we're speaking to, they're almost invisible. They're felt, but without words, without kind of pointing to it, we don't know how to navigate it. We haven't been taught. We haven't been guided there. We don't have fathers that will say, let me hear your pain. Let me hear your unworthiness. That's not there. And for those that are, you could feel the difference.
Hmm.
So, I was kind of dealing in this invisible realm, and I think it's the beauty of having a mirror, when they can really kind of pull all this stuff that's hiding behind us, and they can pull it out in front. So it's no longer invisible. It's no longer a shadow. It's actually a mirror. And that part is that's the juice of the initiatory process that a lot of men don't get the opportunity and invitation to feel. So they just stay in the descent, they stay in the disruption, or they stay in the pre-shadow viewing, and they just go back into the mechanisms, which will then eventually create enough distortion for them to start the process all over again and weigh the options again and seek that's the beauty of it, is the distortion always seeks balance, and it will create experiences that call a man back to himself.
Yeah, and each time is the choice point. And there's two words that have been really coming through with me at a metaphorical level lately, and it's the mask and the mirror. And what you just mentioned is, like every man is going to have a mirror moment. And whether that's something extreme or those little, 2 a.m. moments where he's catching himself scrolling and saying, what the fuck am I doing here right now?
Yeah,
Like we get all these micro and macro mirror moments that we
sure.
can confront and get almost like a glimpse behind the mask. Because another thing you just mentioned earlier was about the performance. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, be it in men's workspaces even, or let alone in our day-to-day lives, like so many of us are performing, and I'm having to check in with myself all the time, like, where am I still performing to earn approval?
Sure.
Because it's there, that piece is always there. And
Sure.
I think it's come to that point where that mask, it's almost like Jim Carrey, the movie The Mask, like that
Mm-hmm.
thing just becomes so bound to us. It becomes part of the identity, and it's hard to see through the performance. Where do you think, like, where does that performance come from for so
Mm.
many of us?
Yeah, I mean, I I love speaking to my experience because I can really point to it easily. Growing up, my mom was incapable of holding big emotions. She was bipolar, probably well before bipolar was a diagnosis, but ultimately she had a lot of highs and lows. And my highs, or my excitement when I was a young boy, really rattled her cage. And so she got into the habit of diminishing my light by telling me not to cry, by telling me not to be too big, not too loud. And my father wasn't around. My father
Mm.
he was working. He was 9 to 7. And the little bit that I got with him, they were tender moments, but we never really crossed. It was like the emotional world was with my mom, and the mental world was with my dad. And so I never got to blend these to find out like what dad thinks about the emotions. And so I just put on this mask, and it was like, okay, my emotions are clearly too big. So I'm going to stop them. I'm going to suppress them, and I'm not going to share anything that I need, because clearly whatever I need isn't going to be met with love and acceptance. It's just going to be met with resistance and too muchness. So at a really young age, I put on this mask of I'm just too much. So I got to really, really dim my light. I've got to tame my voice. And ultimately, it turned me into a shell. And these adaptive patterns often come from just little subtle moments in childhood as to how we're able to actually experience our emotional world. And that's just my family. I mean, if we're going to add the cultural context of, just we all know the basic ones of don't feel your emotions, man up, crying, don't cry. We see it in all the propaganda media. We see it in all the movies. It's all there. So if that's what's front and center, how would a man be met if he wasn't that way? So a lot of men are afraid of entering into that world to be shamed or to be rid from the community. This is a survival mechanism. This is tribe and community first. If my bros don't accept me because I'm expressive and I'm sharing, my inner world, where am I going to go? So these are adaptive survival tribal patterns that have been injected into our culture.
Mm. Uninitiated men raising uninitiated men, and these
Correct.
wounds continue to just get passed down. I mean, I saw that even in the education system. Like, I worked
For
8
sure.
years in there really trying to change things, and
Mm,
the ethos there, I mean, it drove me out, right? Like, it was at the end of it, it was either you comply with this medical mandate or you lose your job. And so the decision for me was easy at that point. I was lucky enough to be aware of what I stood for, and I stood for it.
yeah.
So, but I watched so many people around me just, abandon themselves to be able to
Hmm.
comply and fit in. And
Yeah.
it just reinforced this idea. Like, we talk about critical thought and compassion and, being value driven, but then end up through our actions show that we prioritize conformity and compliance. Be the good boy, be the good boy, good girl. And that happens in schools, that happens at home, that happens in all of these micro moments where, I think at a young age, psychologically, like, there's a balance between authenticity and belonging. And these are both like fundamental human needs that we hold. And unfortunately, it seems that authenticity is almost 100% of the time sacrificed for belonging. But belonging, when authenticity is sacrificed, is not belonging, it is fitting in.
Of course. Yeah.
And that is perpetuating this place where, like, you asked me 5 years ago in relationship, in life, what do I really want? I didn't have an answer.
Mm.
And in leaning in over these last few years to realize, who the fuck would trust a man like that, who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know what he wants, doesn't know what he stands for? What do you think about that?
Yeah, man, that stands for nothing falls for anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, again, it comes back to the mentorship and the lack of elders, the lack of initiation is that men have been molded by design into comfort and conformity and quick thrills and dopamine. And we're at this turning point in the world where wars are being fought in our name. And that war is a mirror of the inner war that men are looking away from. And so that intensity, that inner war, that handing away their power to all of their lower addictions and vices and lack of purpose and direction. I mean, it's by design, and it worked really successfully because those that are in power and control are doing exactly as they will, as they need to, as men are lulled to sleep. And so the call of the heart, the call of the awakened warrior, there's an urgency to it right now, because men are at this turning point where women are exhausted. They're looking for the kings to rise up to protect the kingdom because we've handed all the power away to those that will do evil deeds and call it good. There's a real law of inversion at play, and it's inverted the warrior within men. And that inversion looks like men being hooked on things that they, feel powerless in. And so it really is a journey of reclamation that I believe begins with sobriety. I mean, I think
Hmm.
it's the beautiful part of the initiation, and if it's something that I'm going to point to that's really like the urgent missing piece, is that in the hero's journey, there's a separation. There's a separation from the old life, the old way of beginning. You just spoke to it. There's a separation of you and the education system and all that you believed yourself to need to do to be put into the system to be successful, to then find out that that system no longer serves you. And then you get in this magical space, which is, who am I underneath all of it? If I'm going to peel back all the layers, what happens when I stop drinking? That was the first step for me. Where am I going to be attracted to? And ultimately, the beautiful process that happens is we go from chaos to peace, and we're able to rest in it. I think that's the arc of the initiatory process, is recognizing how unbalanced, how chaotic men are operating. And naturally, we're seeing that outside of us. And what happens is when we could really separate ourselves, fast, wilderness, darkness retreats, men's retreats, sobriety, just the way that we eat, all of these little subtleties offer us like a whole new baseline operating system when we pluck all of these chips out of our system of like, okay, that religion, that story, all of these little chips that we remove from our computer system, and we got to begin with a brand new framework.
Yeah. And I think too, like, man, there's no shortage of quick hits of dopamine that one could chase, be it the drugs, be it the screens, all the pixels, all the, the porn. Like, there's no shortage of ways to soothe ourselves from the pain of being disconnected from why we're really here, and keep going back into not remembering what's so precious about this beautiful life that I've been gifted. And it makes me think of another one of your quotes that I'd like to read.
Please do.
The age of the uninitiated man is ending. Evolve or vanish into the loneliness of your own unclaimed soul. Most men have been programmed not to feel, mistaking comfort for courage, and outsourcing the warrior in them to men they'll never meet. It's not an accident. They've been programming men for decades to be numb and easy to manage. Because a man who can't feel won't fight for what's his. Most men are still chasing approval from a father, a family, a mentor, or someone they've been trying to prove themselves to for years. I know because I carried it. I thought if I achieved enough, they'd finally be proud. And when that day came, it didn't change a thing. But when I connected to my own heart and started living from it, speaking from it, the world opened. Every day became drenched in the sheer awe of life. Love deeper, colors richer, freedom beyond anything I'd chased before. The real work is being okay with never getting the approval you craved. Reparenting yourself, giving yourself the love, trust, and permission that you've been waiting for. If you stop performing for their approval today, who would you become? Initiation begins where comfort ends. It's the dark corridor men avoid. Grief, truth, and the death of who they think they are. Where a man's wound is, there he finds his genius. Robert Bly. Tell me, man.
There's a lot of meat on that bone.
Oh,
yeah, there's a lot of meat on that bone. And what I'm speaking to there is something that can only be experienced as you're in it. And, I was asking myself the question as I was on the sobriety journey, as I was putting myself through countless thresholds. And it's part of the hero's journey is to immerse yourself in challenge. I had been so sedated, and the challenge that I wanted to, really get to the mountaintop was success in business. And once I got there, man, it just there was nothing. That's what I'm speaking to. I had an incredible financial year, and I could feel like my dad didn't care.
Mm.
Like nobody really cared. And so I recognized everything I was doing for everybody else's approval, but I didn't yet have mine. And while what I did was a glorious feat and super admirable and has been a really important foundational piece in my life and understanding how to be an entrepreneur and create success in business and draw people in, I hadn't challenged myself in like real ways. I hadn't let go of vices. I hadn't let go of friends. I hadn't entered into the wilderness or the wild or the forest or get lost in adventure. I had so much comfort and conformity. And so when I started to do sweat lodges and I started to do fasts, and I would prepare for plant ceremonies and do dietas, I got to witness and experience all of the voices, all of the things, all of the comforts, all of the beautiful words that the sugar would use to speak to me, to lure me in. And I got to overcome every single one of them. And then I got to be able to get to the other side with a assurance, a resilience that nobody could hand to me. Only I could do that. And what was beautiful is that somewhere along the journey, and it can happen in a moment where there's an entire collapse of the process where it's like, oh, I actually have made it because I believe in myself.
Mm.
And nobody can ever hand that to me. There's no level of facilitation training. There's no amount of plant ceremonies. There's no titles. There's no awards. There's no followers that can ever satiate that. It's an inner knowing. It's like a shift in a man's psyche where he says, oh, I no longer give a shit how people perceive me. That doesn't mean that I'm going to show up and, be out of integrity. That just means I'm no longer living for other people's approval. I know how to self-source myself and show up like the father with all the words. I get to give that to myself. The mother with the nurturing, I get to show up for myself in that way. That's why I speak to the reparenting process, because a lot of men are waiting for their mom to show up in their partner, and a lot of women are waiting for their father to show up in the man. And that brings people together to do the work, but it can never be that itch can never be satiated by other. It needs to be tended to. And it's a beautiful, beautiful process. And I can remember the moment where I was just like, oh, wow, I no longer need to do anything anymore. Like, I'm good. And what does this mean? It's like another grueling opportunity to reinvent myself all over again. And, I'd probably say I'm like in the front end of that still, like another layer of reinvention and reorienting and paying closer attention to what that looks like.
Mm. Me too.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's an ongoing process. And I think it's the process of maturing, because honestly, like, I don't think a man can be mature as long as he's seeking the approval of his mother and his father and playing that out in every single relationship he's in. And I think even for the men, a lot of guys do that. I mean, some just check out completely and pursue quick dopamine hits and don't give much of a shit at all. And others climb the mountain of success and check a lot of the boxes. And, we hear the midlife crisis kind of concept, right? That idea of, well, once you've checked enough boxes and realized that you've been doing this, building all of this for some idea of what you thought would make other people happy, but you're miserable and you've lost yourself inside.
Sure.
Okay, well, then there's a reckoning that has to be able to come in. That's a moment that comes, but at least they're climbing a mountain, because you're developing skills, you're developing tools, discipline to be able to work for something that is transferable to another mountain. But what I'm coming to realize on my journey, and I mean, I've been a perpetual nice guy, a perpetual people pleaser, and realizing that, like, I do have desires. I do have wants. And as I get
Hmm.
connected with my desires and live in alignment with those, I become not only do those actually show up in reality, but I become attractive to people around me. I become this
Yeah.
living magnet because
Mhm.
I stand for something. And it's rare these days. You know, one thing is like the
Super.
bar is so low
Right.
that it like to actually be a man who stands for something and is attractive in that way, who's self-sourcing, who gets approval from here, not from anybody else. I mean, man, that is a force to be reckoned with these days, and it really stands out from the crowd.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And women sense it,
Right.
because it's like you said, the bar is so low. Well, the bar is pretty much, like it, because it's non existent in Western culture, when it is seen, it's felt.
Mm.
It's like no amount of words have any weight. It's the presence, it's his ability to listen, it's his ability to allow somebody to feel safe because he's ultimately found peace. And when a man can find peace in himself, he can offer peace to every space that he moves into. And that's really the gift. It's the gift that, I'll continue to speak to. I think it's the gift that brought you and I together. You likely felt peace in me and felt like, oh, he's available to talk to. And we were able to have like a really great conversation to explore what's possible for masculinity,
Mm.
and that all begins with peace.
It's really interesting, man. And I think this is part of that primitive language that's beyond words because
Yeah.
it's really a nervous system signal that I think is being communicated in this way. Like to your point, when I met you, I'm like, yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying, but I was drawn to how you are embodied, the presence that you brought to the event that we were at was profound, and I could really feel it, and something in me was wanting more of that. And I think to your point, women feel that too. Like women are oracles. They're incredibly intuitive and they will show the truth. And they don't really give a fuck often about your feelings. They will just
Mhm.
reveal, whatever's there. And
Yeah.
sometimes don't have the greatest ways of revealing that. It's very uncomfortable and it can be
Yeah.
loud and wild and intense. But I think of Kali, with the sword, like
Mhm.
killing Shiva, dancing on Shiva. Like
Beautiful. I
that's the
love it.
beauty. That's the beauty
Yeah.
that the women can offer. But an uninitiated man is going to withdraw into defense, into criticism. He's going to pull away and see that as attack rather than an invitation to grow, to
Yes.
step in. And I didn't realize, like my partners, all of my partners in my failed relationships would ask what's going on. And didn't realize how unsafe it was for me and the women around me when they would ask what's going on, and I would reply with fine or
Mhm.
good, and
Mhm.
they would sense something different in their nervous system and in my nervous system, and how unsafe the discrepancy between what I said how I was and what they
Mm.
felt how I was,
Oh, yeah.
and just how untrustworthy and how unsafe that really is.
Yeah, and it's painful too. And I know it because I did it.
Me
And
too.
so
Yeah.
I got to witness all of my partners when I would be like, it's just fine. And a lot of that just has to do with I didn't have the emotional vocabulary to express the thing. But if I'm gonna just go a level deeper and speak to the overarching shadow that I believe is not only being penetrated in all of the propaganda, but it's also, it's a real problem, is the shadow of victimhood, which
Mm.
is victimhood is super juicy. And it also creates a lot of friendships that enable mediocrity because they're not offering the tough love of love is really challenging because love is truth,
Mm.
and love doesn't waver, and that truth can look like, I can feel something's off, can you explain it to me, can you share a little bit more, a little bit deeper, anytime that was presented to me, I ran and withdrew even more, not knowing that the magic that comes through in ownership and radical responsibility of I failed. I feel like a failure. I want to pick the pieces back up. So many men fail and they just give up. But like the masculine way is to fail and get back on the horse, fail and get back on the horse, like keep going, find the nuggets, find the lessons. Life is happening for me. All things are happening for my greater good. This didn't happen to me. This is happening to show me how I get to evolve. I think so many people are stuck in the lack of evolution, and the beauty, the juice, the crux of life is evolution. I'm not going to be the same person I am in a month as I am right now. I'm going to evolve. I'm going to learn a lesson. I'm going to get presented a circumstance or a trial, and I'm going to overcome. I'm going to get the nugget, and I'm going to move on versus collapsing. What a lot of men see and a lot of men mimic is the collapsing. And I think, it's why I speak to the age of the uninitiated man is just about over, because the collapse of masculinity, I don't know how much deeper and darker it could possibly go, because men are collapsed. They're disconnected. They're basically owned in a cage of their own devices, and they've handed their power away. And, I'm asking, what's it going to take for them to pick up the sword again and take responsibility and radical ownership and responsibility of their life? And I do believe it's going to happen. And that is the gift of overcoming the shadow of victimhood, which is radical ownership. And ownership just feels good. I love owning my life. I love owning my woes. I love owning my vices. I love owning where I'm at, because it paints a true picture of who I am. So people are actually in relationship to me, not to a presentation. So many people are in relationship to a delusion, because what somebody says and what somebody does, just like you pointed out, I'm fine. No, you're not. That's delusional. I'm literally in relationship to a lie. And women, they're over that. They can sniff that out from a mile away.
It's interesting, man. Like, actually, one of the first things when I started, as I was drawn into men's work after many mirror moments that got more and more confronting, one thing I realized is just how good it feels to be seen for who I am, and how much like me not feeling seen in my own life. One, I didn't even realize what it actually felt like to be seen. And two, how I was my own self-sabotage for how little I was being seen, because I wasn't being real. I wasn't being willing to share what I was avoiding in my life, what I'm scared of, what I didn't want this person to know, who and how I'm judging people in my life. I just wanted these kumbaya relationships rather than real radical honesty in these places of growth and love. Like, perhaps the truest mirror of all is love, and it's not always comfortable. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's raw, but it's real. And the depth of relationship that emerged when I started to peel back the layers of my armor. And I think,
Juicy.
on that spectrum of victimhood, I think there's almost two sides, because I think of victimhood and I just like I think it's so potent. I want to double down on it. Like, it's really wherever I or anybody are outsourcing their life to people or situations outside of them, and blaming, criticizing, or judging what's wrong with other people or other things for why their life is where it's at, is the essence of victimhood. And I think often right now it looks like collapse, and sometimes it looks like control, like holding on for dear life. And these are like probably an inflated and deflated sides of that spectrum, where we're either gripping for dear life to try and understand. And I remember in one of your posts, like, the unknown is where God lives. Right. And so like we're clinging to dear life for understanding, for the plan, for having it all figured out, or collapsing and numbing and totally disassociating from the overwhelming experience of what's actually happening. Because, when you drift so far, at some point that reckoning is going to be intense. So it's really like this two spectrum kind of thing. And I'm curious to hear your point. You write a lot about culture, about these forces by design that are intentionally keeping men adrift. You
Mm.
care share more about like what you've been observing within that.
Yeah, I think um, as I started to really kind of absorb myself in understanding men, understanding the psyche of men, I really was guided to a lot of mythopoetic books and beautiful like poems and stories that kind of needed to be read twice in order to find a nugget where it was like, oh wow, I never thought of that. And what I recognized is that there are layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of conditioning that's impressed into cultures. And all of that is possible because of the absence of particular things. So when I began to look of like, how do I fill my life? How do I understand how to be a better human? And I stumbled upon Hero's Journey. I'm like, whoa, why is there no like men's work stuff out there? Like, why is there literally nothing available for men? Or you got to travel across the world to go, where did this go? Oh, wait, what is an elder? Like, what's an elder? I'm a construction worker from Chicago. We don't talk about elders. Like, and what is elder wisdom? And so I started to attune to elder wisdom. And, when I joined the Sacred Sons, they would have elders come and speak, and they were speaking from a lived experience, and they were speaking to this process that was missing. And I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. So I really started to like dig deep and understand, and I got to see the invisible forces that are at play. Let's just call it the engine of the matrix, and how the design, the fabric of it is so genius in that we're going to very, very slowly pull away rites of passage and elder wisdom, and we're going to just make this culture in the West just a machine. And we're going to gradually introduce more and more things for people to be more and more comforted, more and more sedated, because initiation by indigenous cultures, there was a scar, there was a cut, there was a wound, there was a taking away from the mother to go be with the men. Like all of that pain, that fortitude, that resilience, that threshold was missing. And once I saw it, and once those that are on the path see it, you can't unsee it. And once you see that there's a design to make men weak, because a weak man is easy to control, and when men are sedated, wars can be waged in our name, and agendas can happen, and poisoning can happen. And all of this is just easy pickings because men aren't paying attention. And so there is many directions that I go, but I just like to call it the engine. And it's bankers, it's institutions, it's lobbyists, it's politicians. There's, follow the white rabbit. It'll take you to all of the places and the spaces, but it's an energy, and the energy is dark, and the energy is inversion.
Hmm.
And they that worship a darkness creates an absence of light. And if we're going to speak to what's truly missing, it's a deeper connection to God, to rhythm, to nature, to the unknown, to surrender, to trust, to intuition, to this spiritual realm, which is where all of the creativity, all of the joy, all of the crux of life gets to come through. And it's the juice of life. It's when you have the download that turns into a book. It's when you have the download that turns into a post that change people's lives. Like that is the realm, the spiritual realm that so many people are disconnected from because they got this thing in front of them, the soul sucker. So, yeah. Yes, there is a design. Yes, the design is powerful, and we're more powerful once we see it and we can dissolve it and see past the illusion.
Amen, brother. You said there's a book on your heart before we started the call, and I'm curious to hear you share a little bit more. I know we've been dancing in this territory throughout the calls, but what's been coming through your heart that that's starting to emerge with this book?
Yeah, what I'm noticing um, is that there were some greats when it comes to books that I read that really helped me understand the masculine psyche. And look, I'm near 50, and the books that were written by men in the 80s, and culture has dramatically changed. I mean, just post COVID and what's happened and the response, the reaction, the fear, all of that hasn't been really spoken to. And
Mm.
so I'm feeling this urgency in the world today, and I'm also sensing what's missing, which is initiation and the conversation around initiation, and the conversation being done in a way that's more modernized. That if a 20 something year old man were to pick up the book, it's not going to be done in colorful poems and, these long drawn out kind of stories, as most of the mythopoetic books, as rich as they are. Sometimes it's a little dry and crunchy, and younger men, they're used to these quick hits. So to keep their attention, I recognize that something needs to be written in a way that's like enticing to what their brains gotten used to. So I'm really working to navigate in the space of what does it look like to write a book to meet a man that's in his 20s, that's looking for initiation, that's never heard the word, but something about crossing a threshold. Every man has it. It's the call of the soul. It's the call of a man's heart. There's no denying it. So I'd like to give it words, to give it texture, to give it rhythm, for it to be more accessible and understandable to men, for them to naturally be able to see that there's something greater than the call of the 9 to 5, or the call to family, which all of those are great, but there's always going to be something more, something richer, a deeper inner call for a man, and I'd like to meet him there.
Mm.
And that's been coming through recently, and I think it's going to come through in interviews with the greats, the ones that have written the mythopoetic, and also for me to understand the younger generation to, so like I intend, maybe the book's going to be an interview style book where I'm actually interviewing them and using that as a lot of the context of the book. um yeah, so it's kind of being birthed, but this space, this conversation, there's so much stuff out there about meditation and breath work, and all of these things are critical. But I don't believe that there's a piece that's more important than the initiatory process for a man's psyche in order for him to live the life that he was born to live.
I agree with you. I really do. And I've been meditating on that myself lately, as I look at I sit around a lot of cultural commentary around, these ideas of toxic masculinity. I have men in my sphere that use those terms, and women around me as well. And that pains me, because I've come to believe in leaning into this work and feeling into feminine and masculine energies. Like, I think these energies are sacred, and it's tragic, honestly, the idea that we're associating masculinity with toxic. And at the same time, I get it. But as I was mentioning to you earlier, I really think it's the addressing of the symptom is accurate, but the diagnosis is wrong. Masculinity is not toxic. It is a sacred force, and it's a stabilizing force. It provides containment, structure, direction. And that is incredible. But what we see are men walking around with adolescent psyches. And I think at the crux, at the core of that, is the lack of initiation. And at the same point, I think part of why it speaks to us is because it lives in our DNA. This is
Mm-hmm.
something that has been ancestrally known to be truth. That's cultures across the globe for millennia have practiced these ancient rites, and they've looked different
Mm-hmm.
all over, but they've had very common underlying patterns. And I think part of what we're seeing with this acknowledging of the rise of that adolescent psyche and calling it toxic masculinity is really the result of, to your point, a lack of initiation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And when we talk about masculinity, I think what you pointed out there really resonates. Is masculine is it's an energy. And I think what we get to understand in the initiatory process is that we're both masculine and feminine. There is a river that runs through us, a current of energy. And there's also a receptive energy. You spoke to, it was great to feel seen. Men love to feel seen. That's men tapping into their feminine aspect that creates balance, because so much of masculinity is outward assertion and so little of it is inner receptivity and trust and listening. And that listening piece is, I think, the juice of masculinity when done in the right way, because it allows balance. We don't always need to be outward. We get to be inward. We get to listen, we get to hear, and we also get to allow people the opportunity to feel seen and loved in our presence. So, I know toxic masculinity has been thrown around there, and I think a lot of it is because the systems that are in play are really corrupt, and they're putting it out on display. And I think the invitation is for us just to be more whole and more connected with our divine nature, which is balance.
Yeah. And perhaps, that's thrown around and amplified because if you continuously tell men he's a danger, he'll believe it and have no idea where his true power actually belongs.
100%. Yeah. Nailed it.
I'm curious about, on the other side of initiation, like what is it that the initiation from your perspective actually offers a man to step into? Like, what does it look like when a man's emerging on the other side of initiation and stepping into, let's call it maturity, or, whatever that is, as he's stepping out? Like, when you start to see men in the world who have been through initiation, what does that look like?
Yeah. That's what I think is really beautiful, is that it's something that we could never really know when we started. When I started my journey, the last thing I thought, and I know this isn't the end of my story, it's just the beginning. I never thought that I'd be creating a clothing line. But what I recognized and what I discovered about myself along the way is that my expression, my fullest expression, was so muted and so whitewashed by the culture that I was around. And also I had lost sense of color of my palette. My life was gray. I was depressed. I was withholding my truth. And once I started to share and I started to express, my vitality came back online, my color, my expression. And then I became magnetic for ideas. And, I've always loved hearing Prince said, if I get the download and I don't see it in the song, Michael Jackson's going to get it. And that happens to a man after he's been through the initiatory process, where a bigger call to his life, a bigger mission, a bigger movement, something that's more important than just success. For me, along the way, I started to really want to birth a clothing line. I didn't really even understand why. It was like the call came before the knowing, and I had to grow into the version of myself today to be able to deliver that. And it's because it is a bigger picture. It is because we are absorbed with fast fashion. It's because we are being poisoned with toxins in the clothes and polyester that shrinks people's frequency. To those that aren't attuned, they're not paying attention to labels. They're not having the bigger they're just grabbing the thing at Costco and they're moving, but there's an energy to everything that we do. And on the other side of the initiatory experience, we get to be sovereign with every single choice that we make. And I recognized a gap that was out there, something that was missing. Like, let's have a bigger conversation about men, fashion, and clothing, so that men can have more sovereignty and understanding what they're choosing. I didn't see anybody doing that, so I'm going to offer that to the world. And I think, just to condense it down, I think the beauty is that men get to offer their genius in a way that's never been done.
Mm. Yeah, man. And that's both, I guess, with the growing tension, with the growing situation that we find ourselves in, especially what seems amplified post COVID and with these growing wars, and that's overwhelming. And it's also a beautiful opportunity for us to rise, to collaborate, to create, to think of what's not been done before, or reinvent what has, in a way that will speak to the people who are on this planet right now. And, I really think it's beautiful, like even to take that microcosm of the clothing line and recognizing, okay, like testosterone has plummeted. Obviously there's environmental factors and food factors, and there's no doubt that polyester and all of these artificial fabrics are having a direct impact on our vitality, on our sovereignty, on our ability to really step up and lead. And for you to just be able to be witness to that and, feel the pain of it, grieve it,
Hmm.
understand it at a personal level, and then also at a cultural level, and then move into action and say, okay, well, what is my part here? What can I do to address this in a constructive way, rather than continue, like, stay in the blame, stay in the what's wrong, stay in the judgment. Like,
Hmm.
it's so much. You could have just sat there and stayed pointing out how shitty polyester fabrics were, but
Sure.
instead, it's been over a year, and it's been a year and a half since we spoke, and you're still in this beautiful birthing phase, because you see the
Hmm.
importance of what this is and what
Yes.
this means, not only for you, but for the world and all those around you.
Yeah, and I think there's something juicy that comes in the other end of the initiatory process, which is we want to be tested.
Mm.
I've done the things now. Like I've shown up in ways that I didn't even believe were to be possible. What am I made of?
Mm.
Like, I think that's the question that then invites opportunities for men to really go into the forge, to build, to craft a legacy that's not just transactional, it's meaningful. It has a bigger picture, and it includes helping to heal others, to have a bigger conversation. That's the piece that's so important, is that we get to be tested and we get to see what we're continued to like, are we the real deal? And so for me, I ask myself, am I the real deal? Like, I say that I'm the real deal. Now let me create an experience so that I can be, tested
Mm.
and to come out on the other end and learn from it. It's juicy.
That is juicy. And I love the perspective shift, because it's, rather than the woe is me, like, why is this next thing happening? It's like, thank you. Right. It's thank you for the opportunity. And I believe even in a prayer, if I'm putting out a prayer for more courage, God or spirit or source might not necessarily give me courage, but it will give me an opportunity to practice courage.
Hmm. Oh, yes.
And so, like,
It's all more of a fortification of our knowing.
that's it. It is the fortification, and the initiated man invites that. And to your point,
Yes.
right? That is like, okay, this is uncomfortable. I'm going to feel
Mhm.
this. I'm going to sit with it and not try and control it nor collapse under it. But instead of my typical reactive state, I'm going to come back to my place of freedom, my place of sovereignty, that space between the stimulus, and come back to my ability to choose what is right, what is true, and what is needed in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I'll put it out there. I don't always have all the answers. I have spaces of doubt. And the difference is that my trust outweighs my doubt.
Mm.
And I also recognize the rhythms of life. There's spaces of discomfort. And sometimes I need to sit in that discomfort and be with it. And oftentimes that's an invitation to rest. I can't always be 100% on Sacred King, fire blazing posts that penetrate the algorithm of Instagram. Oftentimes I need to be gentle and I need to listen
Mm.
and I need to trust the process. And usually in nature's rhythm, God's rhythm, the right timing, everything aligns.
Mm. Yeah, man. Beautiful. We were talking earlier about women who've been, you know, likely on this journey for longer than a lot of men who've been, stuck in these kind of grunt force, push it down, keep going through. And women with their disposition, with what's been going on, they are growing. They've, as you said earlier, have done the work, who've been leaning in, who've been opening up, and they're no longer wanting to settle. They're not wanting to just take breadcrumbs, and instead they're wanting to call men in, and not,
They want the feast.
they want the feast. They want the king. They want the real deal. And
Yeah.
I'd love for you to speak more about that, because I know it's something that, as you put your posts out there, you've actually had direct engagement from so many women. And I'm curious to hear what you're seeing from the women.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting process for me because I've been in relationship for a decade. And so I'm not tuned to the environment of dating, the culture of swipes, the downfall of what it's like to live in a culture where men wait for the women to initiate something through an app. And so it's always an educational process for me to facilitate posts on social media, because for me, it's a noticing, and then it's a request for them to share. And I will preface that, like, women are so incredible because they have a cycle, and their cycle allows them to be more attuned to their emotional world if that woman is attuned to it. And that's a one up on men right out the gates, because they have this purging cycle happening each month that allows them to move through the density. Their body just does it for them often. And so naturally, they're going to be able to witness that men don't honor that cycle. Men have cycles too, and it's actually every day. And so women have the eyes. That's why we call them the oracle, because they can see how a man's just a hamster on a wheel, and they're exhausted. And I think they're exhausted from carrying the weight of potential. And I think we're at a major turning point in the world where women are beginning to walk away much sooner from, what used to be red flags now are no longer tolerable. There is more of a alignment that's happening within women, within communities, within conversations, with using social media. And it's not a shaming of men. That's what was beautiful. That's what I felt. I felt them tired, so tired that they didn't even have it in them to pray anymore. Like, the exhaustion is so deep. It's on such a macro level from government structures and the disorienting of women, and calling them witches, and like, they've seen all of that. They understand all of that. They've witnessed all of that. They've come back together, and they're healing their feminine aspects, and they're just waiting and wondering when the men are going to rise. And so when the men do, and they do answer the call, the women are just there to cheer and celebrate and support. And it's just a beautiful thing. But I do think it's also a terrifying moment for the masculine, because I can see the strength in women to walk away. And I could see them choosing themselves in a way that I think is going to be a turning point in history, where men are going to be faced with an opportunity to go fully digital, or to actually be here in your body in reality. I mean, we're already seeing it in movies. We're seeing the disconnect. We're seeing the AI. And I think there's going to be two different timelines, where men disappear into the ethers and choose easy into the phone. And then there's going to be the men that are going to be here for the real thing. And I'm here for the real thing.
I agree. And that they are that living invitation. And for any woman listening, what would you tell them as far as how they can invite either the man they're with or the men in their lives into deeper alignment with who they are and who they're here to be?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question, and I get asked it all the time, and the answer is always the same, which is embody the invitation, which means continue to show up for yourself, and oftentimes that means creating a boundary with the person that's not. And if that's in partnership, if that's in a relationship that at one point didn't have the foundation of evolution, but she's now waking up, she's tending to herself, she's taking care of herself, maybe she's becoming sober, maybe she's no longer aligning with people that aren't speaking the same language she is. I continue to say double down, because there's going to be a turning point, and in the man, he's going to witness it, he's going to feel it. She's going to become an invitation to peace, she's going to become an invitation to fullness, and he's witnessing the mirror of his complacency, and he's going to have two choices, and it's up to her to decide how long she's going to stay. I always like to put all right, give him 6 months. If you don't see anything after 6 months, then really, like, reevaluate. Let's not put it into the cloud forever of, like, at some point he's got to do this, but we never crossed that point. My partner showed up for herself in a way that was beautiful. She created an altar, she started meditating, and she stopped being reactive, and she started softening. She disengaged from the toxic conversations that I was involved in. She completely just withdrew into herself, and it was admirable, and it was felt, and I kind of wanted what she had. So she became the invitation, and then I asked her, how are you doing what you do? And she said, would you like to try meditation? And that's when my life changed. So I can only point back to the experience and what worked for me. And it wasn't telling him to do this. She didn't tell me to do anything. She just took care of herself. The rest was up to me.
I love that. Be the invitation and take care of yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
Women do not need to overperform to make up for men's lack of showing up. And
not at all.
There are ways to communicate more effectively in a way that he can actually hear without shutting down. And there's tools there to be able to share what's on your heart in a way that
Totally.
allows him, rather than it to be shameful or judgmental or these things, but for him to really hear it. And there's tools there. And then, like you said, like at some point, it's a boundary. It's like, what are the standards that you hold for yourself? And I think as she honors herself and chooses herself, that's really the best thing that she could do, to be that living invitation. And sometimes we just can't force those things, as painful as it is.
Yeah, we can never shake somebody awake.
Right.
That awakening is a call to their heart that they get to answer or not. But our responsibility is always to tend to our own call.
Yeah. You actually had a post around that, around not waking others. And I think, like, I can only speak to my own journey, but I know that, like, the different stages as I've been, processing things, I go from ignorance to anger, frustration is this, and then this desire to, like, tell everybody about it and what they need to do and all.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that as just part of the process. But then there's a maturing that happens after that, to get to the point. It's like, okay, I cannot change anybody at all. I am responsible for me. And it's hard enough to be fully in integrity and in ownership in my own life. So let's start there and let's stay there. And then, I think, honestly, what you just said about for women is the best thing that men can do as well. It's the best thing that we can do as humans, is to be the living invitation for the more beautiful world that we know is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And boundaries on things that don't feel in alignment. It's a really soft, subtle thing. But when she disengaged from toxicity, it allowed me to actually notice how toxic I was in my conversations about negativity. These negativity loops that I was on. For her, she no longer wanted to be in that energy, know? And I was like, as soon as she withdrew it, I got to recognize what was hovering. And I'm like, why am I doing that all the time? So it's a beautiful arc in the journey.
Yeah, I think that provides the right amount of contrast to be able to see it. It's like, we can kind of get off on that social sense of belonging and just surround yourself with the people that are going to perpetuate that, right? But all of a sudden somebody's not playing that game and it doesn't feel as cool.
Yeah, kind of alone in it. And I'm like, this doesn't feel as good anymore.
Is there anything else that we didn't touch on here that you'd really like to lean into today?
Man, we went through some beautiful arcs. I think if I were to leave anything out here, because when we speak to initiation, it sounds like a massive hurdle, and it sounds like it's, possibly something that's unattainable. And I just want to preface that, the initiation really begins with one simple step. It's my favorite quote by Rumi: "As you walk, the way appears." And I think this journey of 1,000 miles, or, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I chose the one less traveled, and that's made all the difference. There's a simplicity to this work, and it can just be, I'm no longer going to speak that way to my daughter, and I'm no longer going to use this word in public anymore. I'm no longer going to use this substance. I'm no longer going to do this. It begins with a peel back, and the peel back can be really soft. It can be gentle. It can take as long as it needs to. There's no rush. There's no destination. What we actually realize about the initiatory process is that the juice of life is actually the quest. Has nothing to do about the arrival. We're never arrived. We're always unraveling, learning, unraveling, evolving. It's such a beautiful process, and it really is worth it to just take one little step and enter into the unknown, because it becomes a magical mystery ride, one that books are written about, one that fills color palettes, and one that I believe builds a legacy.
Amen, brother. For people listening who have resonated with what's going on, where can they find you?
I'm on IG at A Sacred King. You can find me there. It's the only platform that I use, the only platform that you can find me on. And give me a follow and tune in.
Yeah, well, you got a beautiful new merch line coming out here soon, so that'd be the place to go to stay up to date. I'm looking forward to when that comes out, because I'll be on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, my man. Yeah, follow and at Sovereign One for the clothing line that's going to be dropping in 2025. I usually say, if it's meant for you, it'll find you.
Yeah. Exciting, man. Very amazing. I love how you speak. I love where you show up from the moment I met you, and it continues to grow. I have deep respect for you as a man who's following his own heart in a loud and noisy world. So thanks for being you, brother, and for taking the time.
Yeah. Today. Thank you, my man. And thanks for being you, for creating this space, this conversation. It takes a lot of courage to have your own podcast, to share it with the world, to be vulnerable, and to pierce the algorithm with some truth, with some honesty and brevity. So just really taking a second to honor you too, my man. We're out here.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get it.
Yeah.